Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and today I have two guests, Robert Gebka and Kathy Monaco. And we're going to talk about mindfulness. And we're also going to hear two very interesting stories how both Robert and Kathy found the world of mindfulness and how they use it in their daily life. And Robert, you actually run the Dorset Mindfulness Centre.
That's right, yes.
And you have a CD that's available from their website, Living
That's
Well.
Right, yes.
And we'll talk a bit more about the centre later because it's interesting because you also work with the NHS.
That's
teach
right,
mindfulness
yes,
on the
yes.
NHS, but we'll come on to that.
Sure.
But let's start first of all with how you both got there in terms of the practice of mindfulness. And it's interesting, Robert, in your notes you sent me, you were saying that 5 years old, you actually had a premonition of how your life would work out to an extent. Just tell us what you do when you were 5 years old.
So I don't know if it was a premonition, but talking to my mother at some point in her life, she said that when I was about 5 years old, I put on a black robe and had pots lined up in front of me. And I started hitting them pots and bowing down and chanting, making a very, very funny sound, something that sounded like Om. And my mother couldn't understand it. She didn't know what that was about. So she kind of just, she said, oh, well, it might be just one of those things that children do. But later on in life, I entered the Buddhist seminary and I was wearing a black robe and I was hitting a Buddhist instrument, and my job was to hit what we call the kudzu, which is a kind of instrument you hold in your hands, and together with other monks and nuns, we would be hitting that instrument and doing a Buddhist ceremony. So somewhere I kind of realized that perhaps there was a connection, something that expressed itself very early in childhood. But I only realized that later on in my life, probably after I went to the seminary, looking back.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how these things happen, isn't it? Yeah. And you had kind of quite deep questions, didn't you, also, quite early on in life?
Yes, I was very curious. I was a very curious child, and I think to some degree it was quite painful for my parents because I was always asking lots of questions. And I was born into the Roman Catholic religion.
Yes.
So both my mother, my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, they were all Catholics. So we would go to church every Sunday and we would do all these things, and I wouldn't understand any of it. I wouldn't understand why, we do this, why we do that. And I asked questions, but for some reason my mother and my grandmother wasn't really able to answer me. So I always, in my mind, wanted to know why. There was always this kind of curiosity about everything, which sometimes got me into a lot of trouble.
And you had, I know, anxiety too, didn't you? Anxiety and depression when you were young. What form did that take?
So yes, the anxiety and depression was something that I experienced pretty much from my teenage life. And it was mainly kind of social anxiety as well as just kind of generalized depression. And I think it was mainly because of what was happening in my family at that time. My parents were very unhappy. They then divorced when we moved to South Africa when I was about 15. So I had a lot of, as any child would have, a lot of unresolved feelings, a lot of things that were very painful that were kind of stuck in me. And I really, when I was growing up, later on in South Africa, I tried to find ways to help myself work with that. So I looked into psychology, I looked into hypnotherapy, and it did answer some of my questions and it did alleviate some of my kind of psychological suffering because it provided me with some understanding in terms of why I was feeling what I was feeling. But there wasn't only this that was there, it wasn't only the depression, there was also something else happening. And that was that curiosity, that's something I experienced when I was 5 years old. A kind of deep thirst for who am I, what is my place in this world, why am I here?
Yes.
So the anxiety and the depression and this kind of inner yearning, more kind of transpersonal thing was happening at the same time, and that was quite a challenging, quite a difficult thing to experience.
Yes, because you're asking such deep questions. It's kind of destabilizing who you think you are, isn't it?
Well, I felt that because of my childhood experiences, which were quite painful, that in itself, in some ways, made me question my self-identity, because my sense of self wasn't very strong. And then on the other side, there was the deep yearning for a kind of universal a kind of questioning in terms of who am I on a kind of more deeper level. So two very strong things happening at the same time. And it took me a long, long time to actually be very, very comfortable with that. And it still continues, it expands, and now I have found a practice. So now I sit comfortably in that experience. But when it's happening to you, you don't know what's happening. You know, you just feel all this pain, all this confusion, all this trauma, you know. And that's what got me into things like addictions. You know, I struggled a lot with substance misuse. I now mentor people who have drug problems, but that was a way of me trying to cope with this pain and with this confusion, and in a way running away from it. I think.
Yeah, you're trying to take the pain and confusion away.
That's right, numb it somehow.
And then you found an advert somewhere for a year monastic training. Sounds a bit kind of drastic.
Yes.
And that attracted you.
Yes, well, I was in the final year of high school when I felt really, really depressed. And I told myself, I think I had about 3 months to go to finish high school. And I told myself, I'm not going back to high school, I'm not going to finish it, because in a way I didn't want to become part of that world. But I didn't know which world I wanted to be part of. But I didn't want to just have a job, I didn't want to just, you know, do something that wasn't really in tune with something that was emerging, this kind of deeper questioning. So I went to Cape Town to visit my father, and very confused, you know, really suffering quite a lot. And I bought this magazine. In South Africa we had the magazine called the Odyssey magazine, do you remember? Yeah. It's a kind of spiritual magazine with all things spiritual and psychological and all that. And I opened the magazine and there it was. And when I saw it, I knew exactly, and that's where I'm going to be going. You know? So I completed with a little ad, a little kind of advertisement. I completed it, I faxed it through to them about 3 times. I didn't get the response. I called them and I said, well, have you received my fax? And they said, we have. I said, well, why didn't you acknowledge? Well, we're waiting to see how eager you really are. You know, I said, oh, thank you very much. You know, but now you know I'm very eager, so can we please get on with it? You know.
Yeah. Oh, good.
And so then I went to the seminary.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a minute. I want to just now go to Kathy, to have her early days. So, you one thing you said to me was that you learnt from your mother fairly early on that to be obedient, well-behaved, and successful, that was the most important thing in life.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, conditional love. That if you weren't obedient, well-behaved, and successful, I wasn't going to get loved. So I had to work at it.
Yes.
And the vehicle for that was my ballet. I started ballet at 4 and carried on right up to when I was 19. And ballet was my life. Unlike Robert, I knew exactly what I was going to do, where I was going, what my place was in this world. I had no doubts. I was a ballet dancer. I was going to succeed. I was going to become famous. And that was how it was. And I remember once at school, the teacher asking us, when we were about 16, to decide on a career we would take if we couldn't dance. Now, I was a very obedient child, and I refused to do it. And then, of course, I did dance, and I danced, and it was extremely hard. And that actually, although I didn't realize it at the time, was the basis of my mindfulness practice. Because when you dance balletically, every movement you have to know what you are doing. It's not like a sport where you just step out and hit the ball or kick the ball. You have to know exactly where every foot is, where every arm is, the angle of your head, your shoulders, the weight, before you kick the ball. And then when you kick the ball, it has to look easy and graceful. So that was put into me from when I was 4 years old. And of course, I grew up, I did a ballet matric at the Johannesburg High School for Art, Ballet and Music, and got into the provincial, what was then the provincial ballet company in South Africa. And I was there for 2 years, and it was a very different world. It was tremendously exciting because this, of course, was at a professional level. But it brought in other aspects of life which nobody had ever taught me about. Politics, company politics. I hadn't a clue, didn't even know such things existed. I just thought you went out and did your class every day to the best of your ability, and the best person took the leading roles, and it was that simple. I didn't realize about politics and sex, of course, which was another aspect. So, yes, I was in the back row of the corps de ballet and sort of managed and what have you, but obviously I wasn't really that good, and they retrenched me at the end of the second year, and that was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. And what was in a way worse, although I couldn't differentiate the different levels of pain at the time, was the fact that nobody cared. My parents were totally unsupportive and felt, well, good, now you can get a proper job. But the question was, if the ballet was so important to them as I was growing up, why wasn't it so important to them now at 19? How did it suddenly become not important? Where did the game change? So all of this, of course, was too much for me. I had nobody to talk to or to counsel about this, and I got married. That, of course, is always the best thing to do. And I tried my best to become the best little wife one could hope for. But ultimately, that was not very satisfying, not compared to a professional, artistic life. Right? And I left my husband eventually, but in the meantime I had gone into the corporate world. I got a job with an American company doing fuel and energy cost control, and it was a wonderful job in that you traveled. You would visit customers all over the country, and there were competitions, an annual competition, and if you made them enough money, you would travel overseas at their expense to the conference. And 1 year the conference would be America, and 1 year the conference would be Europe. It alternated. And altogether I went to 6 conferences, and those were the best times of my life.
Yeah, so that was when you felt you'd achieved something and appreciated.
Yes, yes.
But moving it forward, you then had a second marriage.
Yes, I had a second marriage, and that didn't work, and I had changed careers because unfortunately I worked for a company, this was in the 70s and in the 80s, where they were very hesitant about women in the beginning, and women certainly were not permitted to move into management. And that was where my sights were headed, and it was clear they were never going to allow me to move into management.
So again, you got blocked.
Yes. So I left and I changed careers and went into recruitment, specifically headhunting or search and selection at a very high level, and I worked as a resourcer, finding people.
You got to the stage where you were introduced to Buddhism and started to get some answers.
Yes, well, that side of my life also started to fade because the company, for many various reasons, causes and conditions, was falling apart. And the boyfriend I had at the time, that relationship came to an end. And I had found the Chinese temple through my Tai Chi teacher. I was doing Tai Chi at the time, and I visited there, and it was just beautiful. I was always drawn to Chinese things, their art, their statues, their fabrics. And the temple had absolutely everything that was interesting. And there it was, between Johannesburg and Pretoria in the bushveld.
I can see how alive your face comes now, talking about the temple.
It was an anachronism. Anyway, that was where I first met Robert, because Robert was organising the retreats, and I went on.
So you were kind of drawn there. It sounds like you tried 2 marriages, several jobs, the dancing career, all didn't get somewhere, and you had the notes again. The notes you gave me, you got to the point where, what is the point of it all?
That's right.
And that somehow we have to do that. We have to get to this bottom point. What is the point of it? And then something can appear.
That's right.
And recognising that that is not easy, but staying with that. And so the temple appear. We'll come back to you in a minute. So, getting back your notes. So you went initially for the 1-year monastic training.
Yes, that's right. And that's where I learned really to be with myself, but in a very focused way. The focus at the seminary was very much on meditation, very much on personal study, studying Buddhist psychology, Buddhist philosophy, as well as the kind of Chinese cultural aspect of the experience. So things like chanting, liturgy, you know, we were wearing the kind of monastic robes as well.
You shaved your head, I guess.
Which I still keep
shaving.
No,
but you had your hair at one time, I guess.
Yes. We shave the hair, which is the shaving of the hair is a symbol for renunciation.
Yes.
Renouncing the normal kind of mundane lifestyle, if you want to call it, and you're entering into a more focused monastic lifestyle. And so it was a very, very challenging time for me, because I still had all these unresolved things, all this anxieties, all these, which probably wasn't more than the kind of normal person on the street had. But every time I sat with myself in the meditation, and we were meditating very often in the day, it was all coming up.
Well, of course, because your mind's not busy, so what's bubbling under is going to appear, isn't it?
That's right. And I struggled with that.
So was there any kind of... Were you able to talk to somebody about that in the monastery, the fact you had this anxiety and depression coming up?
Not in the seminary, not when I was a monk. It was very strict, very Zen. You sit... Sometimes you can talk to the teacher, you know, but it's a very it's a certain type of Buddhism, school of Buddhism, where the focus is really just on yourself sitting and being with yourself. There isn't that much support in terms of counselling or teaching or kind of having guidance from the teacher. In terms
of the practice would be that you sit with it, and would it dissipate on its own in time? Is that what would happen?
Naturally, that's what happens. If you understand meditation and if you follow the practice, you will just observe the mental content, the feelings, the difficulties arising, and as they arise, you let them come up, you observe them, you let them go. But if the feelings are very strong and there's a lot of trauma, then the ego can't really cope with that, and you tend to suppress it back. So it comes up, you get frightened, you don't know what to do with it, and you push it back. And that's what I was doing. I was pushing it back.
Yeah.
And I realized very early on that I was going to need not only a Buddhist mindfulness approach, but also a psychotherapeutic approach.
Yes.
I had that insight.
But you still lasted in the monastery for 5 years.
That's right. And so after I finished my 1-year monastic training, I decided to stay on, but as a laity, I disrobed,
Okay, so you were living outside the monastery.
No, still in the complex, but
Yes.
just not in the seminary, but more in the monastery.
Okay. And what difference was that practically?
It was different because I was no longer, first of all, I was no longer a monk. I was wearing normal clothes. I was now a lay practitioner, but still part of the community.
Yes.
So, you know, I could do pretty much whatever I wanted. There weren't those kind of restrictions that you had when you were monastic.
And then you met the Dalai Lama, I think, at this stage, didn't you?
I met His Holiness the Dalai Lama in my final month as a monk in December 1999. He was visiting Durban, South Africa.
Yes.
I was still in my robes at that
Yes.
time, and I was very fortunate to. It was a big blessing in my life
Yes,
to have
I
met
can
him.
imagine. Yeah.
And that blessing, I feel, still carries me through, just in terms of the compassion he has under the current circumstances. He's a very good role model for me, and I feel also for the world as well.
Yeah. Just don't touch your microphone when you touch here,
Oh,
okay?
okay.
Otherwise it comes out on the sound.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Kathy, let's pick up your story
Right.
again. So, you went. It's the same monastery Robert was at.
Yes, yes.
So you then entered the monastery.
Well, I went first of all to the meditation retreat.
Yes.
And it absolutely blew my socks off. It was so disciplined, and a part of me craved that because that is ballet. Ballet
Isn't that
is
interesting?
totally
yeah,
disciplined.
So it brought you back to that
Yes.
feeling you had then.
Yes. And I started to read about Buddhism, and the more I read, the more my eternal questions were answered. And I began to think that if there was a way I could go to the monastery just for a couple of months initially, I could sort myself out and decide what to do with the rest of my life. And so I made inquiries through Robert, who referred it to the abbess at the time, and I went to see her, and she said to me, but you know, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to give up your corporate job and come and work here as a volunteer? And I said to her, Venerable, if I don't try, I will never know.
But
And
what else was pulling you apart? Okay, there was the discipline you liked, but what else was pulling you there?
The opportunity to enter a different world and to completely, for a period of time, cut ties with the average outside world that watches TV and thinks, today is Monday, I do this or that. What clothes am I going to wear? What am I going to eat tonight? Is my car safe outside? You think about that in South Africa
So
a
something
lot.
deep was brewing inside you. Something was really
Oh,
pulling
yes,
you.
yes. And
Yeah.
of course, I was suffering a lot from all the suppressed misery from all the past decades. And I think I sensed in a way there was an opportunity for that to, if not be healed, at least be understood by me more clearly.
And what happened in your meditations?
The meditations were wonderful. It was at last a place where you could drop the body. I was very fortunate, having been a dancer. I did not find it very difficult to sit absolutely still without moving for
But could you
periods of
find,
time.
Robert was saying, when he meditated, he had the anxiety come up?
I had no anxiety or feelings like that at all. I was just found this wonderful open space in my head that I could stretch out and have time to work things out and think about everything clearly.
But I thought the idea of meditation was to drop thinking. You found that helpful to...
Yes, yes. That, don't forget, there are two stages to meditation.
Okay.
The first stage is to calm the mind, which is shamatha. That is calming the mind and stopping all those irritating thoughts about, have I collected the dry cleaning, and where are the cars, and what's the children doing, and to stop that. And then after that, you let the problems, the issues arise, which they will naturally.
Yes.
And then you can look at them and actually go in and see, but why am I suffering like this? What are the causes and conditions that have come together to cause the suffering? How do I stop the suffering? What practice must I use to stop suffering? And in order to do that, of course, you have to observe, and that was one of the first things our teacher, Master Huizhi, taught us, was to sit in your mind as an observer and watch. Do not judge. Above all, do not judge yourself.
So you're just watching your thoughts that come out, the emotional issues that come up.
Yes.
And then through that,
you gain
kind of insight comes.
They always say, when you have settled the mind and your issues arise and you look at it clearly, your wisdom, we all have our own innate wisdom, and that arises, and then you will see what to do, what the solution is.
And that was usually clear for you, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, and then you, I think, had quite a big shock because they sent you to Taiwan.
Well,
is that right? That was the sequence?
First of all, yes, that was much further down the line. Initially, I was there as a volunteer for a year, and then I became Chuja. Chuja in Chinese means home leaver, and it is then when you take the first step on the monastic path. You shave the head, you wear the robes, you live in the monastic community, and they watch you. You have to be watched as a woman for 3 years.
So what do you mean they watch you?
To see your behavior, to see your tendencies, to see if you are display greed or temper or rage or selfishness, because all of these things are emotion, energy that comes to you, and you attach onto it with your story from wherever you come from. And some people, of course, we all know, a lot of people in this world cannot handle anger.
So are they giving you some feedback and some help?
No, you do not get that from in the Asian tradition. In the Asian tradition, you are left entirely alone to work it out yourself.
Okay, but let's say they see in you some anger or some...
They will rebuke you.
That you get rebuked? You get punished for that?
Not punished, but it is made very clear that your behavior is unacceptable.
But there's no offer of help
No.
so you can...
No. I think I must mention very clearly at this point, in the West, we have a very clear idea of the role of psychotherapy, psychology, psychoanalysis in helping people who have problems. In the East, they have had none of that. It did not exist. What existed was the temple and meditation. You went and meditated. If you had somebody in your family who was funny, an old aunt or an erratic cousin, and they couldn't be handled at home, they were sent to the temple. And then you were put and sat down and you meditated.
Wow.
And that was it.
And this is where I realized this earlier on, that when you live in a monastic environment, you really just have the meditation to guide you in terms of working with yourself. But for people who have perhaps more deeper difficulties,
it's not enough.
you need something else as well.
Yeah.
You need more of a creative working with the mind, more psychotherapeutic approach. And this is where I realized this, and when I was in the monastery doing the workshops and retreats, which Kathy and I, we did together at some point as well, we realized that we need to bring in the psychotherapeutic, the Western. We need to kind of marry the two. Because people who were coming to us in the monastery, they struggled from stress, anxiety, depression, and asking them to sit for half an hour, 45 minutes in Zen meditation was not doing them any good.
Making them worse, I would think.
Could make them worse,
Yes.
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 So we created a kind of scenario, a retreat where we would introduce these meditation techniques in a slow, gradual process.
Sort of
first,
gently.
very gently. First, by starting to kind of encourage the attitude of befriending yourself psychologically, understanding what is stress, what are emotions, what are feelings, and then slowly introducing meditation. And that worked very well.
Yeah, and I'm also noticing here that you, I don't know if you were both involved with this, but you had this Lotus program which introduces mindfulness to individuals in prisons.
That's right. So that's
were you actually going into prisons and teaching mindfulness?
Yes. So that's something that I and Kathy started when we were in the monastery, and it's still being continued by our colleague in South Africa, Wendy. She's still doing it, so it's still being continued. And we went to prisons and we introduced mindfulness to prisoners.
And how is that received by them? Because that's a different world for them to have this spiritual practice introduced. Were they presumably they were receptive?
Well, we introduced the project in a non-spiritual way. The focus was more on meditation, mindfulness, kind of stress reduction, but many of them had spiritual interests as well.
They did.
So we catered for that as well. But we used a more of a neutral psychological method. And the people that the prisoners who joined were selected from the case loads from the social worker, who she felt they would benefit from that. So we've done, I think, 4 or 5 workshops in a prison. That's maximum security.
Yeah, wow, that must be an experience.
Yes.
Yes.
And it was a very humbling experience, because one always thinks, oh, maximum security prison, and these people have murdered people, they've done the most terrible things, which they have done, and now you're going to meet them. And you have fear initially, but when you get to know them, you realize pretty soon, there but for the grace of God go I. And you become very humble because you understand that your life has been very fortunate in not creating causes and conditions which might have resulted in you sitting in prison for your life. And you get a completely different idea about guilt, crime, hate, anger, those sort of things.
We always use the attitude that the behavior is not right, but the person always is.
Yes.
So explain that more.
So we say that at the foundation, in terms of the person, he or she always has the kind of good nature. We can call it the awareness or the consciousness or the Buddha mind or whatever. That is always there. But sometimes conditions and causes put us in situations, and upbringing and learning certain things in a certain way make us do things which in themselves are not good. So we say the behavior is not productive, is not good, and we need to try and change that. But the person on the fundamental level is always good.
Okay.
And that's why there's always potential, no matter where you are starting from, whether you have severe problems or whether you're really struggling, just like the lotus flower growing from muddy waters, finally emerging above and opening up, so does the person have the potential to...
It sounds like you're approaching them without judgment.
Yes, because the other thing that one realizes is the prisoner sitting opposite you at that moment is not the person who committed the crime. Where his mind was at the time of the crime was filled usually with anger, 99% of the time with anger, plus added together with alcohol and or drugs. And that person sitting opposite you is not like that anymore. So one has to understand that our minds, which direct our bodies, change all the time. And you cannot treat somebody in one way because of something they did once.
And
Although, the fact that what they did was socially unacceptable and obviously taking a life of another person, or persons in some instances, that is our social structure. It has to be contained.
And the person has to be given the people have to be kept safe, you know.
Yes.
So the victims need to be kept safe. People need to be kept safe. But at the same time, we can also provide a place of rehabilitation rather than just punishment. Otherwise, we're not really utilizing that experience of the person being in jail to the fullest potential. So that was an approach that we're using.
Okay, so we need not to go in too much detail now because I'm looking at the clock and the time's whizzing by, but it's fascinating. I find it very interesting. So then you were sent to Taiwan, is that right? Which was the kind of...
That was the temple or the monastery in South Africa is part of the main order, which is in Taiwan, and that is Foguanshan. And it is the biggest Buddhist order in Taiwan. It has a huge main monastery. At any time, there are at least 700 to 800 people in residence, with different monks and nuns coming and leaving all the time. And I was sent there because they did not approve of my having become chuja as a woman, because I was the first woman in Africa ever to have done this on the Chinese path. There are other women who have done it through Tibetan Buddhism or other divisions of Buddhism, but the Chinese Buddhism, I was the very first person to have the head shaved, wear the robes, and politics again.
So you got knocked back again?
Politics again. And so I went to Taiwan, and of course it was not anything I had imagined. And because I wasn't told anything about it, I imagined what I imagined, and it was the greatest shock to go there and see it was quite different. It was immensely imposing. There's no doubt about that. The quality of the care of the monks and nuns is excellent. There is no lack of funding from the very, very devoted devotees who provide the financial support for the monastery. When it comes to education, medical attention, the food, clothing, accommodation, it is absolutely superb. But the people were not what I had expected. But what was the most hurtful was they resented me so much. That was something I had never expected. I just hadn't. Obviously, in any big group situation, some people will dislike you. You can't please everyone all the time. But I just didn't realize so many people would dislike me. And that there would be such an enormous gap between the very wonderful ideals of Venerable Master Xing Yun, who leads the monastery, and the monks and nuns at lower levels, which is a management structure. The chief executive always has the best ideas, has the drive, the ambition, and the foresight. But it is the people at the lower levels that sometimes can muddy the water. And so this was the situation.
How are your meditations there?
A very little meditation.
Very little meditation?
Yes.
Wow.
Very little meditation. We had one traditional Chinese style meditation retreat for 7 days, which was wonderful. very hard. From a Westerner's point of view, exceptionally hard. You did not move in your 40-minute sessions. You just didn't move. When we slept all together on a traditional bed, which is a wooden platform, like little sardines in a row. That was your space. You slid forward at every morning, put your feet in your shoes, off to the bathroom. Everything was cued, everything was in a rota. You did not speak.
Wow.
Very hard. You eat in a certain amount of time. You do not speak. You do walking meditation.
Everything is completely structured.
Everything, from your first breath to your last breath. Yes.
Okay, we're gonna, and I know you then left. We need to just speed this up. So, but it's still fascinating. And then you eventually left, and we'll come back to what happened then afterwards. So, to pick up your story, another set of notes here. So you then, you also left the monastery because you wanted to see what it was like in the world, didn't you?
Yes, I felt that the monastery has done everything it could do for me, really, and I wanted to experience life outside the monastery. I wanted to find my own independence, because when you live in a monastery, you are very protected.
That's right.
You know, you don't really, you don't really see, you don't really experience the difficulties.
Not at all.
And because I haven't yet been, unlike Kathy, in that world, I wanted to experience that world. I wanted to make my stand. And so I left the monastery. I went back towards my mother's, when my mother was living. I opened a stress clinic for about a year.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it wasn't financially successful, so I decided to come to England.
Yes. And then you had a couple of jobs in that, but at one point, though, you moved to Bournemouth. Was it Bournemouth you moved to?
That's
and you were homeless.
That's right. So what happened was basically I lived in Windsor for about 5 years.
Yes.
My mother at that time got a job at Windsor Castle. She was a member of the royal household, and she worked for the Queen, so I decided to move to live kind of next to her. And then she went back to South Africa, and unfortunately she passed away.
Yes. From
lung cancer. And shortly, well, actually a week or so, 2 weeks afterwards, I got a calling, which is the second time I got a calling. The first time when I went to the monastery, and that is to go away.
Yes.
Go away where there are no people, where there is silence. And I went to the Isle of Skye on a personal meditation retreat.
Right. Where
I stayed for 6 months. And then following that, the job, because it was a live-in position, the job ended and I had to go somewhere. So I came to Bournemouth because my friend was here and stayed with her. Couldn't stay there for very long, and I was faced with homelessness. So the government helped me to get some money to get a place, and a new chapter of my life started. I was financially in a very, very difficult situation, but because I had my mindfulness practice to return to, and I was doing that pretty much every day, I felt like something was opening up, and I had an insight sitting on the beach, almost like a calm within a storm, and something told me, just stay awake, don't give in to the fear, because this is a wonderful opportunity. And from there on, things just started changing very quickly, and I started volunteering for the NHS. I was then recommended, I got a paid position, and started working. And then I started looking for opportunities for sharing mindfulness in a very secular, non-religious way.
We should actually just maybe go back to basics with the two of you. So, just very simply, what is mindfulness?
So mindfulness can be expressed in many different ways. It's almost like having different types of bread.
Okay.
You can have white bread, you can have whole wheat bread, you can have half whole wheat bread, you can have bread with certain seeds, rye bread. So it just depends who you're talking to. Fundamentally, to me personally, mindfulness is about a way of working with your own life. It's finding a way of having less judgment, more skill, and cultivating a sense of awareness. And it's almost like a carpenter working with something that he wants to create. He might want to create a perfect piece of furniture, looking for a perfect piece of wood, but all he could find is cracked pine. And so he works with it, and he examines, he's curious about it. So we become curious about our own mind rather than judging ourselves.
Okay, so for somebody who's watching this now on their computer or television or wherever they're watching it, and they don't know really what being mindful means practically, what would you say to them? They're sitting watching and they're interested in trying out being mindful. So what does that mean? They get up from the computer when hopefully they stay to the end of the program, and then what do they do that's introducing mindfulness? What are the practical steps?
Well, I see it in a practical way as always bringing your mind back to the present moment. We spend, all of us, an awful lot of time either running past history, past stories in our head, or projecting possible future scenarios.
Okay, so we say it's being aware of what our mind is doing.
Yes, we are not in the present moment.
So once we're aware, then we realise we have a choice of not going into the past.
Yes.
Or
going into
to
the
possible future, but staying with what we're feeling and thinking now.
Right now.
Yes, okay.
And the point is that you lose your attention when you do that. And that is how 90% of motor accidents occur. That's how people lose their car keys or do the silliest things they sometimes do, is because their mind is not in the present moment. And from that point of view alone, it has immediate benefit. Immediate benefit. And it is a habit. One develops a habit of always, as soon as you become familiar with a particular situation, I'm getting into the car, I'm going to start driving, your mind drifts off.
Automatic pilot.
Yes, and that is where you need to keep watching and say, no, I'm driving. There's a white car in front of me. What's in my rear view mirror? What's in the side mirror? Where am I going? And you keep yourself in the moment.
Okay, so that takes quite a commitment for a lot of people, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because we're so used to drifting off.
Yes.
Well, it can be commitment, but it can also be from a place of, if you've suffered enough and you're in the corner, you're going to try and look for things to help yourself. And if the cause and conditions are right, then you'll come across mindfulness. And mindfulness, again, is like I said, different types of bread, because it can be in the form of therapy. In the NHS, we use something called MBCT, or Mindfulness Based Cognitive Therapy. So
then you're understanding what's going on in your mind more, is that right? You're getting a more of a deeper view, about a deeper overview of how you're working.
Well, with that particular type of mindfulness, it's for people who have anxiety and depression, so you're helping them work with that kind of situation.
Okay.
Then you have mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is for people who are experiencing pain, physical pain, high levels of stress, etc. Then you have something called DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, which uses mindfulness in it as well, which is for people with borderline personality disorders. So that's one flavor, a clinical, therapeutic flavor, one type of bread. The other one is mindfulness for personal development. You might not have any kind of emotional, psychological difficulties, but you want to develop your sense of self. You want to expand your sense of self. You want maybe more direction. You want to learn how to be a little bit more calmer in life. That's another type of bread. And then the other one is mindfulness for wisdom. More kind of transpersonal. You really want to expand your sense of self, your sense of compassion, your sense of understanding and wisdom. So different things for different people.
Right,
really.
no, I understand.
And if I can just add in one more, which doesn't have a special name, and it's just a practice I use, I have found in my life, and watching other people's lives that emotion causes many problems. Too much good emotion or too much bad emotion. And emotion is an energy. As we know, when we get angry, it compels us sometimes to do things we regret. So the whole point is to manage the energy, and the energy is extremely powerful. And one of the only ways you can disengage from getting sucked in to another depressive episode, anger, is to be mindful, is to literally close a door and say, here is a glass of water, here is a table. I am not going to think about the anger that is welling up in me. I am not going to let it. Look how beautiful the flowers are.
So we're shifting attention.
It is keeping that attention.
Because we get preoccupied with our own neuroses.
Yes.
We entertain it. It defines us. And so on one way we want to let it go, but on the other side we want to keep it.
Because also we get payoffs from it.
That's right.
Okay.
So mindfulness is the training of compassionately and kindly acknowledging what's happening internally in terms of your mind and body, and working with that situation in a more skillful way.
And trying to break this habit, this insidious habit of internal discursive dialogue.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to sort of round off your stories, so we just have a degree of completion to where you both are at the moment. So you disrobed, as you put it in the notes you gave, with a heavy heart, and you decided to construct a simple life for yourself using the Buddhist tools that you had learnt.
Right.
And that's still something you're doing. You've simplified your life.
Yes, I've simplified my life completely. And I live a comfortable life, certainly not a Spartan life, but with, I think, a lot less possessions than other people, and I'm very happy with that.
Yes.
And mindfulness. Mindfulness is the key to getting through the difficult times, which never stop coming, no matter how serene, calm, enlightened you are.
It's always challenges, isn't there?
Always challenges, yes.
And then, Robert, you wrote in your notes you gave me that in your life you've been where there was no hope, where there was no light. And I made it through not by a quick miracle, but being fortunate. Just go on how you made it through. You were there with no hope, no light. How did you make it through?
So very, very dark time, and I had the support of my friends, my community, and my mother, things that carried me when I couldn't carry myself. And I got to a point where I came across Buddhism, and I started kind of practicing it. And first it was just kind of cognitively, more like a theory practice. And as time went on, I deepened my practice, and I let it penetrate me. I let it actually become one with me. And now I still do my practice every day, and I now share this with people who are interested to know how to really regain as well as maintain the sense of well-being and happiness and mental well-being.
Okay, great. Well, we need to finish, I'm afraid. I need to be mindful of the time over there, but I think it's been a wonderful interview. I've enjoyed meeting you both. And you, of course, as I said at the beginning, you run the Dorset Mindfulness Centre.
That's right.
Which is a connection with the NHS, and you do classes there. And you have a CD that's available, Living Well with Mindfulness.
Yes.
And Kathy, you're living. Are you a teacher as well, or are you just living?
No. I just live a very quiet life.
Good.
I just want to say that the Dorset Mindfulness Centre has no connection with the NHS, but I also work in the NHS.
I understand. Okay, no, good. I think
and I also teach mindfulness in the NHS.
I think that's wonderful. Mindfulness on the NHS, I think they've got something finally right with the NHS. That's great. Okay, so thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you again for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.
So welcome, my name is Robert Gebka and I'm from the Dorset Mindfulness Centre, and here with me is
Kathy. My name is Kathy and I'm Robert's friend, and I'm here to support him in this demonstration of mindfulness meditation.
So what we'll be guiding you through in the next few minutes is something what we call a 10-minute breathing space. And it's a very short and quick mindfulness practice that you can do pretty much any time. So the first thing that we can do is to simply adjust our posture. Very often when we sit we tend to slouch like that, so if we can just straighten our back, and we can also do this lying down or sitting up, so whichever way you prefer, whichever way is most comfortable for you. And what we'll be doing is really just acknowledging what's happening in the mind and in the body, and we will be bringing the attention back more to the body, because it is more in the body where we can actually get a sense of groundedness and more balance. So the first thing is we simply choose to either leave our eyes open or close our eyes. If we are leaving our eyes open, then we can just lower our gaze as if looking on the floor about 1 meter ahead of us. If we are closing the eyes, and just relaxing the areas around the eyes. And we can start by simply taking a deeper breath, not in any particular way, but just a slightly deeper breath, and allowing the shoulders to relax just a little bit on the exhalation. And then breathing normally, just as the body wants to breathe, without controlling the breath in any way. And just allowing ourselves to settle into this present moment, settle into the physical space of either sitting up or laying down. Just shifting the attention to our physical space. Giving the mind some time to settle down. We might have a busy mind thinking about what happened in the day, or we might be having thoughts about what we're going to do later on. Whatever they are, that's completely fine. That's what the mind does naturally. There's no need to be worried about that. And in a moment I will invite you, if you care to simply check in with your thoughts. So just noticing what thoughts are currently expressing themselves in the mind, just the way they are. Are they comfortable, are they uncomfortable, or are they neutral? Without analyzing them, without making them want to go away, just noticing, just checking in with what thoughts are there at this very moment. And if we get lost in the thoughts or the story or the narrative, that's completely okay. We can just bring ourselves back to just noticing what the thoughts are. And now, if you care to, I'd like to invite you to once again shift the attention from the thoughts to the feelings. So just noticing what feelings are currently expressing themselves within the mind. With a sense of curiosity, with a sense of intrigue perhaps, allowing them space and having a little bit less judgment. Just noticing what feelings are currently there. And in a moment I would like to invite you once again to shift your attention, this time from the thoughts and from the feelings all the way down the body to the left foot. So becoming now more aware of the body, more aware of the physicality. And what sometimes helps is to wiggle the toes, just to get a sense of that part of the body. So perhaps we can wiggle the toes of the left foot, just to get a sense of what that feels like, what that sense is like. And then we can stop wiggling the toes and just allowing ourselves to notice what the space between the foot and the shoe feels like. What does that space of the body, where the foot is making contact with the shoe and the shoe is making contact with the floor, what does that feel like? And if our mind comes up with thoughts and feelings, that's perfectly fine. We can simply, with a sense of kindly awareness, acknowledge what's going on the thought and emotional level, let it be just the way it is, and firmly bring our attention back to the left foot. And let the awareness rest there. And now I would like to once again invite you, if you care to switch attention from the left foot across the space between the left and the right foot to the right foot. And if it's helpful, once again wiggle your toes just to get a sense of the physicality. And just noticing what the right foot feels like. Especially the place of the foot where the foot is making contact with the shoe and the shoe is making contact with the floor. Allowing the mind to rest in that space. Noticing the sensations of that part of the body. Is it cold? Is it warm? Is it tingly? What sensations are in the right foot as it's making contact with the shoe and the floor? And now I'd like to invite you to become aware of both the right and the left foot at the same time. Just getting a sense of both the right and the left foot at the same time, firmly on the ground. This is the space that we can always return to when we feel stressed, when we feel upset, when we feel lost in thought. We can always return to our feet. The feet are always there. So if you are going shopping, walking on the high street, being overwhelmed by the advertisements, it can actually save us a lot of money by just being aware of our feet. Taking a deep breath, acknowledging what's happening in the mind without fighting it, and just gently but firmly shifting the attention to the feet. First the left, then the right, then both. The more we are in our feet, the more we are in the body, the more we are in this moment. So this is a very practical mindfulness technique that we can use pretty much any time and anywhere. So if your eyes are not open already, feel free to slowly open your eyes and reorient yourself back to the room. We can look around the room to get back to the physical space, and perhaps stay in this mindful space throughout your day, whatever it is that you're doing. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.